Hello, welcome to Leap to Capability, a learning session series. In this session, we'll be talking about the feedback process, what is feedback, how we need to give feedback, and so on. So to start with, let's understand what is feedback. Any activity that you look at, there is always a provider who provides a product or a service or information. So in this discussion, we'll refer them collectively as a provider who can be providing any of these information or product or services. And then we have receiver who receives this information, service or product from the provider. In simple terms, provider can be any organization or a company or a business, and the receiver is a customer. That's one example. There are other instances as well. Now, every time a receiver receives any of these products or services, subconsciously, each one of us think, how useful is it? Is it good enough? Is it value for money? And so on. So this is a very natural thoughts that one would get. And then the receiver looks at sharing this experience with the provider. And then whatever may be the mechanism of sharing the experience, which is a feedback process, that kicks in. Though unfortunately, in most cases, it's a negative feedback that people look at largely in giving, or a bad experience they had. But I think we should also consider giving a good feedback as well, right? That is equally important. So to summarize, the feedback is the process of sharing a receiver's experience with the provider. So this is the first step of understanding what is a feedback. Then let's look at who gives feedback. Now there are different scenarios. Earlier I just took an example of a customer buying a product either online or a shop. But there are other scenarios as well, right? Like a customer receiving services when you visit a hotel or a restaurant, or you fly, or the hospital you visit, and so on. There are many such service organizations, or even a bank for that matter. Similarly, a professor-student interaction, a manager and a team member interaction, parent-child. I'm sure each one of us can relate here, either as a parent, and every parent has already been a child in the past, and from a child perspective. So this is very common that every one of us can relate, and likewise citizens to government. Now, there are few instances like, let's say, a manager to team member, where the conventional understanding is the feedback is manager is giving a feedback to team member. But there are many organizations nowadays who have adopted what is known as 360-degree feedback, where team members give feedback to managers on their leadership skills, on their behaviors, and so on. So here there is a two-way feedback process or mechanism that exists. These are exceptions. In most cases, you may not find a two-way interaction. Yeah, even in a parent-child, you may visualize a two-way feedback process. But largely, by and large, this is just an illustrative list of who are those who give feedback and those different scenarios. I'm sure there are many more that we can think of. Now, whenever we look at a feedback, it should be a constructive feedback, right? In the sense, if I give a feedback to a provider, there should be some benefit out of it. So how do I go about in doing that? Firstly, you need to evaluate the content. When I use the word content, I mean any product or service or information that I'm receiving against my expectations or requirements. So I need to evaluate against that. So these are my expectations, these are my requirements. As against that, how do I see this product or service? So that should be the thought process. And then avoid having any bias. I mean, unfortunately, there are several instances where the receivers have bias towards provider on various factors. It could be based on their background or their education level, maybe the gender, the region they come from. You know, there are so many of those backgrounds of biases, which is unfortunate. I think we should avoid that. Sometimes it gets difficult. Bias overtakes us, but I think that's the professionalism we have to build in to remove the element of bias. And the main intention in giving any feedback or constructive feedback is to enable the provider to improve their quality of a service. So if I am giving this feedback to a provider, I should think that it should help the provider to improve their quality of product or service. So that should be the thought process. And it is not about saying something that's bad or something very poor. As I said earlier, unfortunately, in most cases, people give feedback only when something is bad or something has gone wrong. But I'm sure there are many things that are good, right? I can't visualize any product or any process or any person who is completely horrible or bad. I don't think that's possible. There will surely be good points. Maybe the level of that goodness may vary, but surely there are good points. So you need to look at highlighting them as well. And criticism is nothing but if you do opposite of all of these, that amounts to criticism. So the ultimate intention should be to provide constructive feedback and not just to criticize. Now, why is it important to give feedback? First of all, as I said earlier, it is from the provider's perspective mainly. I am giving this feedback so that it improves the quality or standard of the output delivered by the provider. So that's a first and foremost. I mean, if I think very selfishly from a receiver's point of view, as a customer, I may choose not to give a feedback, be it good or bad. It doesn't matter to me, right? But then if I give a feedback, a constructive feedback, it will help the provider to improve their quality or even maintain their quality. If you're giving a good feedback, they will be confident and do more of that. And if something is not good, if you give it in the right spirit, in a constructive way, they will take it and improve upon it. And so the constructive feedback is important for the providers to understand what has been the experience of receivers. Because if I'm a provider, when I've designed this product or a service, I thought that, okay, these are the features and these are the functionalities that it should have. And I'll assume that it's all going good, it's all going fine. But only when I know what the receivers are experiencing, I can judge and evaluate whether it is as per what I thought or not. And then that will help me to think through what changes I need to bring about in the product or service. Now, when should the feedback be given? I think it largely revolves around the timeline aspect. A timely feedback is very, very important and closer to the point of experience. So if today, let's say I've been to a restaurant and I didn't like the taste of one particular dish. So I should give that feedback then and there to the manager or to the chef or a cook. Let's say I go after 1 month again to the same restaurant and then say, oh, you know what? Last month, this particular dish was not tasting very well. Now that has no meaning. Maybe for all you know, the cook would have changed, or even if they didn't change, they can't relate to it. They can't make any changes because they can't recollect what they did 1 month back. That's too long ago. So a delayed feedback will lose its relevance in any context you may take, right? So important thing here is whenever a receiver experiences anything good or bad, giving the feedback as close to that timeline is critical. And then how you give feedback or the method of giving feedback. As I mentioned earlier, firstly, start by highlighting some of the good points or strengths. That's always a very healthy and starting on a positive note. And then depending on the medium of providing feedback, it would vary a bit. Firstly, if you look at online comments, if you are talking of online shopping or lots of things nowadays are online and through e-commerce portals. So the way you give your online comments, and in some cases you may email it to the concerned person, you're like a customer care of a company. So you're sending an email with certain information and points. And in the cases where you're talking like a manager and team member or a professor to a student and so on, a meeting is always effective. And when I say meeting, it can be virtual or in person. Nowadays, more of virtual scenarios are increasing. So even a virtual meeting is good enough here. So that will be far more effective if you're meeting a person in that case than sending an email. Imagine if the manager constantly just sends email to the team members with the points. I think the effectiveness will not be all that great as opposed to you meet and explain, where you can convey a lot many points. And the feedback content. First of all, be specific. to any product or service that you are talking about. Don't give very generic and sweeping statements. Let's say I bought a product and it turned out to be bad. Some feature is not working well. Now, if I give a feedback saying, "Oh, this product is useless," or "This is not at all worth it," it doesn't mean anything. You can't take anything out of it. But if I'm very specific, okay, so and so feature hasn't been working well, this part of the service was poor, so then that is more actionable, even from a reader's point of view. Even for other customers who may read will understand what you're talking about. And that's why the comment should be fact-based and avoid generic statements. And in some cases, you may also have to look at the responses on the feedback by the provider. In the sense, I as a customer gave a feedback. In most cases, it could be one way. Online comments, I just give a comment, I post it, it's done deal. Nowadays, you see a lot of these organizations reacting to those comments as well, but you may not be looking at it. But there are situations where, like a manager, team member interaction or a professor-student interaction, it will be a two-way dialogue. Now, if I'm giving a feedback, it doesn't mean that's perfect. So the other person may agree or disagree to some of it. So get into a dialogue, understand if there's a disagreement, why the disagreement. Maybe you have understood it incorrectly, hence you formed a perception or you observed in a certain way. So get into that dialogue. So don't have the mindset, "Oh, I'm giving feedback, so I'm the boss, I'm right." Right? That doesn't work that way. So you got to have a dialogue and come to a consensus. Closing a feedback discussion. Now, this depends on the type of feedback and the interaction you're doing, and it would vary on a case to case. But in most cases, this is relevant if it is a one-to-one meeting. When I say one-to-one meeting, it could be an email as well, or even virtual or in-person meeting. So consolidate all the discussion points, whatever you have discussed, and agree on next actions or steps. Any feedback discussion of this sort, like a manager, team member, or a professor, student, etc., if you are not walking out of the meeting with some agreed actions, I personally feel that feedback discussion has not been effective, right? Because if you are giving a feedback, what next? What am I supposed to do out of it? So there has to be some actions that we decide collectively. And if there are disagreements, and there will be disagreements, mind you, it can never be possible that everything that is said looks perfect until somebody is agreeing under compulsion or a force. That's a different scenario. We'll not get there. But in a normal, professional, healthy environment of discussion, there will be disagreements and there will be a dialogue. And in some cases, if you are unable to get to a consensus, maybe you have to involve your seniors as well. So be open to that option as well. And lastly, more than what you say, it is how you say matters the most. And I'm sure you can relate to many instances, professional, personal. Sometimes the way you say or how you say may sometimes hurt people more than what I actually are saying, right? So the how overtakes the what part of it, the language they use, the words you use, and the tone in which you say, all of that constitutes the how part of it. And lay a good focus or emphasis on this. That's very, very important. And of course, what part is equally important. So this is a very key phrase that I try to follow. More than what you say, how you say matters the most. And then to summarize the key points from this session, the feedback should be unbiased, it should be constructive, it should be fact-based, timely, and lastly, and more importantly, it should be an opportunity for the provider to improve their quality or standard. And I would like to conclude with my phrase, have the mindset of a student. This is what keeps the learning process active always. Do subscribe to this YouTube channel for further such similar learning sessions that you can look at. And if you have any feedback or questions, do write to learn2capability@gmail.com. Thank you and wish you all the best.